Hello everybody, and welcome back to Poképaint, the series where I draw Pokémon to populate my fan-made Pokémon region based on Florida. Last time I got to work on the first of my early route Pokémon with my Route 1 bug type and its 3 branched evolutions. This time I will be finishing off the Route 1 category of Pokémon with my Route 1 normal types, the regional bird and the regional rodent. I explained it pretty thoroughly last time, but for like the two people who maybe don't know, the main series Pokemon games usually ease the players into a new region by introducing them to some weaker and non-threatening Pokemon early on that help teach the players about catching, battling, and evolving their Pokemon. These Pokemon start out weaker and easier to catch and evolve into stronger forms more quickly, giving players some earlier opportunities to train some more powerful Pokemon at the expense that they may become less relevant or interesting later on in the game. The Route 1 bird and rodent, along with the bug, are usually considered the 3 main kinds of early encounter Pokemon in every game, so let's get started right away with my Route 1 rodent. At first glance, my rodent might seem repetitive or uninspired, being based on squirrels and chipmunks, but looking at the rodents found in real-world Florida, we actually don't have too many to choose from. Between field mice and marsh rabbits, squirrels and chipmunks are really it. I took a visual pun approach with the inspiration of this Pokemon, basing it not only on the animals in question, but also on a species of grass called squirrel grass, named after the fluffy tips that look like the tails of squirrels. Flipping this concept, the image of a squirrel with a tail that was made of a curled leafy plant in the shape of a squirrel's tail jumped into my head. The first form would not, however, be this squirrel grass hybrid. Rather, I left that idea for the final form. Chipit, whose name comes from chipmunk and pit, another word for the seed of a fruit, would be based on a Bulbasaur-like hybrid between a chipmunk and an acorn, in reference to how chipmunks will collect nuts in preparation for winter. Replacing the fluffy chipmunk tail with the nub at the bottom of an acorn would leave visual space for the link between the two forms. I actually drew Chipit after I did my first pass on the evolved form and had the original idea to make it fully round, in the shape of an acorn, but eventually I steered in a different direction to, I think, the benefit of the final design. The one consistency in all of my ideas for this form was the image of a little chipmunk wearing an acorn cap as a hat. Chipit, the seedling Pokemon. Numerous in their home region, Chipit are considered pests due to their habit of stealing crops from farms. A seed pod is placed on its head at birth, and Chipit collects seeds and fruits to nourish this seed pod as it grows. It stores seeds in its expandable cheek pouches. It can store hundreds at a single time. The evolved form of Chipit, Sorrodent, was the first of the 2 that I started designing, but I actually went back and did a second pass after I finished Chipit due to the fact that I really liked Chipit way more than I did my original Sorrodent. My first pass I felt was a little boring and visually felt too much like a Disney character rather than a Pokemon. On my second pass, I really paid attention to the silhouette and the shape that it made, using it to communicate the physicality of the character. My main vision for this form was that the leafy tail would stick up behind it and be way bigger than the actual body in size, making an interesting disparity between the 2 halves of the body. I had the idea that the tail, among other things, would act as sort of camouflage in the way that if this Pokemon were, say, hiding in the tall grass, the tail would stick out and make it appear like it was just another plant in the brush. I had a very early design of this Pokemon with a pompadour-like fluff that I ditched earlier on, but brought back for my final design when I had finished the first form and decided on the importance of the visual motif of the hat-like acorn cap. This, at first, was an accidental reference to a trend in Japanese media that punk characters will often have pompadour hairstyles similar to the ones found on Sorrodent, and although this was at first not intentional, I do think it serves to properly communicate the personality difference between the 2 forms, as squirrels are usually a little more outgoing and aggressive, more punk, if you could say so, than chipmunks. The name Sorrodent comes from a combination of the words rodent and sorrel, a catch-all term for a group of leafy greens that includes spinach and kale. I chose sorrel as it sounds similar to the word squirrel. Sorrodent, the squirrel grass Pokemon and the evolved form of Chipit. Its seed pod has bloomed into a tall bladed plant. This growth allows for this Pokemon to photosynthesize alongside its foraging diet that gives Sorrodent near boundless energy. Their health can be temperamental, however, as during droughts their leaf can wilt, and during cold or rainy seasons they can become tired and sluggish. Keeping a Sorrodent can be challenging, as it's like having a pet and a houseplant all in one. For my regional bird, a little bit of research led me to an idea that was very Floridian in nature. The first two forms would resemble songbirds like mockingbirds, as the mockingbird is the Florida state bird. Not only that, but my regional bird would take the common approach of starting off as a smaller omnivorous bird and evolving into a predatory bird, as mine would evolve into an osprey. Though at first this seems a little random, this is actually a reference to a real-life event in Florida state history. As though the state bird has been the mockingbird for all of its history, there was recently a movement to change the state bird to an osprey. Why exactly this happened, I don't know, and to my understanding, the movement eventually died off quite recently, but even so, I do think that my evolution line makes for a fantastic representation of that little note in Florida state history. The first form, Coocopy, was a relatively simple stylization of a mockingbird in the Pokemon style. Physically, there's not too much to make it stand apart from its real-life counterpart. However, I did play up the mockingbird's ability to mimic the sounds of other birds in its Pokédex page. The name comes from a portmanteau of cuckoo, as in cuckoo bird, and copy. Coocopy, the songbird Pokemon. They can perfectly mimic any noise they hear. Their favorite noises to copy are the calls of other bird Pokemon. It is unknown whether or not Coocopy has their own call, as they are always mimicking others. The songs of Coocopy flocks differ depending on the environment in which they are found in. In the countryside, their song consists of the sounds of woodland Pokemon like Kricketot, while in the cities they often mimic the car horns and sirens of heavy traffic. Coocopy originally only evolved once into a single final Osprey Pokemon, but seeing the difference in the body types of my bird Pokemon early on, I decided that giving my regional bird a second stage would not only soften the transition between the two, but also make it more similar to the others in the main series that mostly have three forms. Though still based on mockingbirds, the second form is based specifically on the larger and more aggressive northeastern mockingbird, a type of mockingbird that is related to the ones found in Florida, but apparently not commonly found in Florida itself. In this form, I began implementing musical imagery. This can be seen vaguely in the shape of its eye and head markings that not only serve as a visual bridge between the patterns of the first and final form, but also, if you squint, make the vague shape of a musical note. Tralark's name is a combination of tralala, a reference to the musical side of its design, and lark, a similar but unrelated type of songbird that's often mistaken for a mockingbird. Tralark, the songbird Pokemon, and the evolved form of Coocopy. Using their voices as their main form of attack, they can let out a powerful sonic boom that can knock foes off their feet. Their high intelligence allows them to mimic sounds perfectly, and in captivity, a Tralark may learn numerous human words. They are known to migrate based on the seasons, and during a time of seasonal shift, one can guess where a Tralark has recently traveled from based on what its call sounds like. The final form is of course based on an osprey. It was surprisingly difficult to stylize this bird into the Pokemon style, as it has rather complicated feather markings when compared to the other regional birds, especially since I've done an osprey Pokemon in the past and wasn't super impressed with my work. However, the stripy pattern of an osprey's wings was something that I ended up being able to spin to my advantage, as in the way I drew them, I was almost able to make them look similar to the staffs of music sheets. In a similar vein, I also added some musical notes into this design inside the inner fold of the wings. I had a few concerns with my version that slowly eased as I drew. One was that the first two stages didn't change nearly as much as the more drastic change to the final design did. But eventually I came to feel that my change was appropriate based on the idea that the evolutionary line came from in the first place. I also was concerned that the colors would be far too dull in the whites and dark browns that I used, but after realizing that this color palette was basically the exact palette of Staraptor, who is my favorite of the official regional birds, I was more comfortable with my final design. Its name is a portmanteau of choir and avior. Choiavior, the soaring Pokemon, and the evolved form of Tralark. Fierce, solitary hunters, Choiavior's call is louder than the roar of a jet engine. They hunt small Pokemon and stun them with their thunderous call. Though most of their lives they soar through the skies alone, once a year they will return to their roosting grounds of their flock and spend time with their lifelong mates. These gatherings of Choiavior are called an orchestra. So alongside their evolutions, Fire Ant, the Fire Ant Pokemon, Chipit, the Seedling Pokemon, and Coocopy, the Songbird Pokemon, are my trio of Route 1 Pokemon. What do you think? Would any of these make your team? Let me know in the comments below. A few small notes before I sign off for the day. I have an awesome Poképaint creation that actually doesn't come from me, but from a fan on the Discord. User Big Daddy Komasen went out of their way not only to make stats for the final forms of my starter Pokemon, but also to make signature moves for them. Moves that were so interesting and well thought out that I just had to include them in some way, shape, or form into the quote-unquote canon of my series. As described in their post on the Discord, Formolisk's signature move would be Rotten Sprout, which would entangle the user in foliage with a chance to badly poison the opponent 30% of the time. Lodorage would get the move Searing Greed, and it would, quote, hammer the opponent with a flaming arm, knocking away their held item. And Crustamancer's signature move would be Foam Spell, which is described as the user fires 2 blasts of magically guided foam from its claws, hitting either both opponents in a double battle once, or one opponent twice. The attack cannot miss. And not only is it absolutely crazy how well these moves fit in with the existing lore of the Pokemon, but also how well the mechanical aspect of these moves was thought out as well, and I just love them. Thank you so much for all the thought that inevitably went into these moves. Awesome job. Relating these starters back to the early route Pokemon, though I didn't do it on purpose, it's worth pointing out that 2/3 of the starter trio types are represented here in the secondary typings of my early route Pokemon. I decided to lean into this a little more in designing some more of my early Pokemon for some of the upcoming videos. The evolved form of an upcoming Pokemon will have the secondary typing of water, so I guess all of the starter types will be represented in my early Pokemon. So I'll keep you all guessing at what that Pokemon may be. Though I might be done designing my Route 1 reoccurring Mons, every region has some early Pokemon that don't quite fit into the Route 1 role, but are still found early on in the journey, just before or after the first gym. So I'll be tackling these Pokemon in the next handful of videos. I hope you're all as excited as I am. But for now, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, then leave a like. And if you want to see more like it, then subscribe. And turn on the bell to get notified when I upload next.